By now, you're probably already familiar with the name Ahmed El-Didi. And if you're not familiar with his name, you're familiar with what he's alleged to have done. In July, El-Didi and his grown son, Mustafa, were arrested in a northern Toronto suburb for having plotted a terror attack that they were unable to carry out against targets in the Toronto area. The question, since the El-Didis have been arrested, though, is how did they get into Canada? Ahmed El-Didi, the senior of the two, is suspected of having participated in a snuff film produced by the terrorist group ISIS. In this film, El-Didi is alleged to be seen hacking off the hands and feet of a man who's suspected of being an ISIS traitor, someone who had turned on ISIS, someone who had divulged some of their secrets. And here is El-Didi allegedly hacking off the man's hands and feet and letting him die. Oh, it's a lovely person to let into the country. And we did let him in. We let him in as a tourist in 2018. Later that year, he applied for refugee status. In 2019, he was granted refugee status. In 2021, he was given permanent resident status. And in May of 2024, just 3 months ago, he was made a citizen of Canada. In that process, he was screened at least twice and probably 3 times. And in not one of those instances did anyone with the federal bureaucracy say, hey, wait a minute, this guy's dangerous. Maybe we shouldn't let him in. The attitude among federal civil servants and federal politicians of the liberal persuasion is such that no one should be excluded from Canada except in the most extreme cases. Now, I would say this is a most extreme case, but in their mentality, it's just rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. Let anybody in who wants to come in. Don't worry about the red flags that there might be in their record. Now, the curious thing about this is that on August the 28th, on the day that the parliamentary committee is about to start investigating how El-Didi and his son got into this country, Dominic LeBlanc, who is the federal public safety minister, said of the process that ended in the El-Didi's arrest, this is exactly how the investigative and national security system is supposed to work.
And are now charged with 9 serious offenses, including terrorism-related offenses, and are currently incarcerated, remanded into custody. This is the way that the investigative and national security system should work.
By what quirk of logic is that even possible? I think that is simply indicative of how incompetent the federal Liberal government is, because they refuse to see the inherent dangers in Chinese interference in Canada, in Iranian interference in Canada, in ISIS activities in Canada. They do not believe there's anyone from outside the country who means us harm. They simply can't be persuaded that this country has enemies who mean to do it ill. And so LeBlanc says something ridiculous like, oh, this is exactly the way the investigative and national security system is supposed to work. But here's one last thing to keep in mind about this case. The only reason that the El-Didis were arrested in July before they could carry out their terrorist attack was the French security services tipped us off. Our screening system was so inadequate that these two had made it through all the Canadian screening, and only a tip from the French prevented what was a major terror attack being plotted, allegedly by the El-Didis. If that is how Dominic LeBlanc thinks that our national security system should work, he and the rest of the federal government should be turfed from office. For Post Media, I'm Lorne Gunter.